Hey all you furious felines, I'm back, and today I'm going to be showcasing Unreal 5 engine and some of the new game audio implementation techniques it brings with it, using Blueprint and the new audio systems programming feature, Metasounds. Okay, I know, Unreal Engine 5, new, are you crazy? Well...
Whoa. Hold your horses, kiddo. During the making of this video, Unreal Engine 5 updated to Preview 1 version, which is technically still a beta, or just not as early access. But then, a couple days ago, and now a few months into the making of this video, it updated again. So it's not even in beta anymore, it's just released. Now, while that's amazing, and I'm super happy for the Epic team and every Unreal developer out there, that makes every time I brag about being early to the tea party a little bit dull. So take everything from here with a pinch of, I don't know, pain?
Yes, wait, no, okay, maybe a little bit, but that's not the point. Unreal 5 engine was revealed on the Unreal Engine official YouTube channel on the 13th of May 2020. That is nearly 2 years ago, so why am I claiming that it's new? Well, the thing is, Unreal 5 engine is still in early access, and it still hasn't fully replaced Unreal Engine 4. And because it's in early access, there really aren't many companies willing to invest in making games on it outside of that one Chinese developer, Game Science, who ported their company and also their game Black Myth Wukong to Unreal 5 for development, which looks astounding, might I add. Put in perspective, a game I've been grinding recently called Outriders was made on Unreal Engine 4, and it took 5 years to make. 5. Think about that for a moment. Big money games very often tend to have multiple to many years of development, so it should come at no surprise that there's a significant lack of resources on this new engine, let alone all of the new audio implementation systems inside it that everyone has to learn. But enough about that. That's not what you're here for. If you've never seen or heard of Unreal Engine 5 before watching this, I recommend you head on over to Unreal Engine's channel and give their reveal demo a watch, or just visit their website to get an idea of what this new iteration of, arguably, the most popular game engine is offering. So, what will I be using to do this little experiment? Here you can see me running around a level map that I made and coded for in Unreal Engine 5. Here's a peek at what the level looks like from above, and you'll probably notice that it has some assets and textures from Quixel Bridge. If you don't know what Quixel Bridge is, it's a place where you can download textures and models for free in use for your UE5 projects, though the majority of the walls and platforms around this area are or will be courtesy of Blender, which, again, for those that don't know, is a free software, and is also one of the industry standards for 3D modeling. The game has zip lines, moving platforms, a dash, a ladder, and as the concept was for the playable main character to be a cat, I designed a slow falling mechanic as well. So now you've seen the game, now for some context. Why am I even doing this and not something easier? Well, mainly because I like games, and I also like music, and this compacts that into one kind of giga project. But also because, again, I think that tech like this is the forefront of game audio development, and I want to experience being a part of the discovery. I sincerely enjoy both playing games and being part of their development, and getting the opportunity to make projects like this is always going to gnaw on my overwhelmingly short attention span. Alright, what am I actually going to do? Well, that's always a tricky question, but one I can provide some interesting ideas for. First, I'll talk about the music. I can segment this level into 3 sections, which means I need 3 looping tracks that transition smoothly when the player moves between them. The first section will cover the first set of jumps along this wall, as well as this field and the zip lines that take you across this water. That will be the introductory section. The second section will cover the 2 more challenging areas of the platforming, where the player's new skills will be tested as they progress to the last section, which will cover the last jump that takes you to the level's ending. So now we've decided where the sections will be, I can think about what kind of music I want to compose for them. The first section is a simple set of jumps, 1 dash and the zip lines. This area serves to introduce the movement and the environment to the player, so the music can take a more relaxed and light-hearted approach without needing to create any unnecessary tension or drama. Simple, light and loose will serve this area well. This cute 3D platformer Super Lucky's Tale has a great demonstration of this with the music for its first level, Heavy Heads. Its music remains very ambient, the different instruments and timbres glide in and out, keeping within a very light and curious harmony. The different layers keeping to that gentle motif as the player works out how to play the game, only introducing more percussive layers when you interact with the level in certain ways. Like when you have to collect these coins before you run out of time. Listening to this track, I feel like I have a very strong direction for the first section of my game. Moving on to the second section, now that the player is being challenged, I can reflect that in the music. The composition here will need to be faster and more rhythmic. It will also need to feel slightly louder to match the difficulty ramp up. Though, as this is still the game's first level and there is no combat, I can maintain a somewhat curious tone while still driving the platforming. A good example of a game doing this would be the track Finding Glowbox from the 3D platformer Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc. The percussive elements lay rather quiet underneath, while still performing their rhythmic function as the harp and double bass introduce the pulse. The brass suite transitions into a fuller ensemble where the winds and strings create a phantasic soundscape, creating various differently layered harmonies that hover above the percussive pulse. This track is a little more sinister than I would like my track to be, but it serves as a good theoretical fundamental to work off of. In this third and final section here, the player will have to use a new mechanic to safely land in the level's underground end zone, where the door to what would be the next level lies in wait. This area is supposed to forewarn of the dangers lurking in the deep, so to speak, but really I'm going to treat it like an area before a dangerous foe, which gives me an idea. Slow, tense, low density ambient type music, looming with its aspects of threatening silence. I could even play sounds beyond the door that alert the player to the oncoming threat, or add a function that changes the intensity of the music and the sounds as you approach the door whilst keeping it within the bounds of openness to keep the player guessing. You see this kind of calm before the storm approach to music and sounds in games all the time, so much so that referencing only one game for it would be unfair. Anyway, here's an example of this tactic being used, again from Rayman 3. Right before you fight the game's final boss, you're forced to walk through this passageway as the two antagonistic characters have audible dialogue that you, Rayman, with only the unnerving ambient, musicless soundscape accompanying your walk. Did I mention that this game has a really great soundtrack? Okay, I've talked a little bit about the music for these sections, now I can talk about what I want to do with the sound. Obviously, the first thing I'll need is a template list of all the sounds I'm going to need to implement, and some details about them. Special thanks to professional sound designer Stephen Shapler and his very helpful website that gave me some information so that I can make sure to keep all my assets cohesive whilst I work on them. Naturally, it's going to take some time to actually get all these sounds recorded and edited, but I can at least decide what kind of systems I'll want to eventually program into the game first, as that will, at least somewhat, determine which sounds I record and how I record them. But for this, I'll need to see what I actually can do first, or I'd spend all my time in the eternal whirlpool of infinite suffering trying to figure out the possibilities of new technology on my own. Research always goes a long way in programming. Even professional programmers that I've spoken with say how much of their time is spent researching methodology, especially when the programming you're doing is on new software. The trick is to be creative with the techniques that you find. Thankfully for me, there are other like-minded individuals who likewise enjoy playing with new dev toys. As I research, I'm going to keep adding to a playlist of videos as needed, though you can already see that I've added some. For example, this nifty plugin that Dan Reynolds made, or this demonstration of a programming concept. And from this I can start to build a picture of the systems I'm going to need, like randomly generating ambient sounds, or changing what the player hears as they approach this, or making the sound for the platform's movement. So, now you know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm going to do it. I should probably start doing it, huh?
6 months later.
Okay, I'm done. Well, as done as I'm going to be, given that there is a deadline for this, and no matter how much I wish I could improve on it infinitely, there comes a time when enough is enough. And or if I keep trying to improve it, I'm gonna miss the deadline. I'm definitely at that point now, and again, whilst I'd like to keep making improvements, there is a limit to how much one person can do. However, I think it's worth exploring what more I would have done, given the time and or resources. Sometimes the music fades break, and suddenly stop the music, don't know why. Sometimes the dash tooltip gets stuck on the screen, again, don't know why. I didn't have time to learn how to put swimming and therefore swim sounds in. I would have put more Foley into the game to make the supporting diegetic soundscape more believable. I don't know why the underground area isn't dark, it would have been nice if it was darker. Having collectibles would have been great, having a nice enter to the level instead of a hitbox would have been nice. A rolling credits instead of static widgets would have been awesome. Interactive reverb zones using Metasounds for Foley implementation would have been really fun. Sometimes the ziplines send you to Narnia, again, I don't know why. Done more optimizing on non-audio file sizes, though I guess this is a music project. A cool system where if you look a certain direction when in close proximity of the door, you can hear enemies having a muffled conversation through it using the attenuation I put in the Metasound. More on that later. A bigger game so I could write more music, because I like writing music. More sounds to implement. I would have liked to have time to make a system that allows me to play the next footstep over the top of the previous, which would have been useful for something like the river's deeper footsteps. In fairness, a lot of this is solved when you work with a bigger team that isn't just one person on a tight schedule. Plus, it took a lot of time to learn and figure everything out up to this point. After all, this is the newest engine on the latest version, using the most ambitious system I've thought of to boot. But it's still stuff that could have been done better, and it's going to haunt me forever. Anyway,
The game, like I planned, is split into 3 stages, though now the first zone is split into 2 parts, I guess. Part A is this little intro area here, and Part B begins when you cross over into the nice looking field. I have widgets set up to guide the player's inputs, and some rudimentary self-implemented voice lines to give a rough outline of, the point. There's a start menu, the credits, the end menu, with some of the lovely artwork of the character concept for the game and or story surrounding the game's world, and various other bits and bobs that somewhat clean it up into a fully replayable game. So now, the cool bit you've all been patiently waiting for. Slight disclaimer, this might get a bit complicated for viewers with little to no experience with Blueprints, Unreal Engine 4 or 5, or Metasounds, but I'll do my best to explain it as fundamentally and as simply as I can. Don't be afraid to pause, slow down, or re-watch sections of the video if you need more time. These are difficult concepts that took me a lot of time to learn, and I want you to be able to do it just as well in much less time. If you feel overwhelmed, don't be afraid to take a break. The music.
Alright, Pete, let's get going. Entrance says the Lippin's hideout is somewhere in this area. Use your jump button to navigate up to that building. Oh, and you can go both ways, in case you forget anything.
Woohoo! I want to do it again. The system I put in place in Zone 1, as you can see, is a somewhat spaghetti-looking Metasound source. In this source, I've got multiple inputs set up as triggers. I've set the Metasound to be a stereo outputting source, that means it outputs audio through the left and right channels, and I've implemented a simple fade box using another Metasound, else the script would end up looking like my hair after 7 months without either a shower or a haircut. The node defines some basic inputs and outputs, and lets me control which things get to do what in a more organised and easier to read manner, which if things were to be scaled up, for example in a bigger commercial project with hundreds of interlaced scripts, that gets pretty important. One more important thing about this section is the use of cue points in the audio track's exporting process. The cue attached to the serenade tells the Metasound when it's allowed to fire off an input, which lets me create a seamless transition back into the ambient loop. I actually encountered a rather tricky issue with this one, as the cue point wasn't showing up on the track inside the engine, which I later discovered after a few hours of script debugging and vicious googling, was because I was exporting my tracks at 24 bits instead of 16 bits which the Unreal Engine documentation recommends, like the idiot I am. But the need to add cue points onto the project did entice me to download a new thing, Reaper. It was pretty terrifying at first, but it quickly became something fun, another new interesting thing to try. I'm pretty sure I'll need to get to know this tool better, so the fact that I was forced to use it now will spare me a lot of effort down the line.
The pigs might have hidden food in places that are hard to reach. Don't forget to look everywhere.
Hard to reach. Did you forget who I am?
Whoa, this looks hard. Try jumping on that ladder to get on the block. Be careful of the moving platforms.
Moving platforms? Now that's more like it.
Don't worry if you fall. Use the ladder to go back and try again.
Would you let me concentrate?
We're getting closer. Okay, Happy. The hideout should be at the bottom of this chasm. Use your slow falling technique to glide down. My radio won't reach you once you're down there. You know what to do. Good luck, Happy.
The music in the game's second section takes the inspiration I spoke about and creates a faster, more platformy vibe. I'm honestly quite happy with the timbre variation I managed to get into this one, though the dynamic range made it an absolute monster to mix. But it was an engaging challenge, one I was forced to learn to overcome. And not the only one of its kind in this project, clearly. Aside from that though, the second zone doesn't have much interesting stuff going for it in terms of a music system. What it does have though is a fail-safe system that stops the sound bugging out or overplaying if the player walks back through the level after triggering it, or if they try to walk through it more than once. I achieve this by destroying it when they go backwards. Now whilst the first section has a good mix of music system design and composition, and the second section is heavily composition focused, the third section is easily the most ambitious music system design I've ever conceived, and it even builds on new design concepts. So without further ado, I present to you Zone 3. Yep, that's about as confusing as it looks, but I'll give explaining it my best shot. I'll start with the basics. Metasounds, thanks to its recent release, is now interface compatible. The interfaces that you can currently use are these: attenuation and spatialization. I've only had about a month since these were released, so this mostly relies on the distance. What is distance attenuation? Well, put simply, it's the setting that lets you affect the volume of the sounds or music based on how far away they are from the listener, which is the component in the game that hears the in-game audio. For reference, my listener is on the camera. Well, that's cool, but don't game engines do that already? Mostly, yes, they do, but there are limitations to how you can use that attenuation to affect the soundscape in the game. Allow me to elaborate. I can take the attenuation distance input and place it in the Metasound source, and then if this source is spawned in the world, for example, if I did this and spawned it at an object's location, when the Metasound is playing, this input will feed in a distance value based on how far away the listener is. I can take this distance and use it to do some calculations. I take the distance and I place it in a map range node. This node takes a range of values and turns it into another range of values based on where in the inputted range it is. So for example, let's take this line. If this end was a value of 0 and this end was a value of 1000, I can use the map range to make this other line, which might have a value of 0 here and a value of 10 here. If the point on the first range was, let's say, 600, the map range would output a value of 6 instead. It's like it calculates the percentage of the initial range that it's in, and then maps that percentage onto the output range, and takes that value, which is very, very, very useful. Well, why? Because now, if I input these distances and map it to a range of 0 to 1, I can use this output to multiply by the audio, and that effectively automates the wave player's volume based on how far away you are. That system of taking a distance and automating the volume is what you can see here. This is the script for playing the first non-diegetic music scape in Zone 3. Similar to how I wanted to do it, the musical ambience fades away as you approach the door, leaving only the cluster ambience and the scary behind the door soundscape. The second thing I need to explain, now that I know how to map distance onto a unique input range, is how I can use that to choose between audio files. Just briefly, if you don't know what a crossfade is, it's when one track gradually fades out whilst another one fades in. It's important to know how this works for this part, because the next node that I use is a crossfade. This node works by taking an input value and crossfading between the tracks that are being sent into the node. If I map a range of 0 to 4, the crossfade will fade between those values, playing the 5 given wave players at various volumes, based on which respective value they have in the crossfade. This map range decided how the crossfade will behave, and this one is another one of the volume attenuation maps that I showed before. The result is a 2D instrument cluster loop that gradually gets more intense the closer you are to the door. As a bonus, the reason I have 2 copies of the system is so I can output all the audio in stereo, which I could do by just dragging another line in from the existing nodes, but I think this looks neater. Now we know how the distance input can be used to attenuate the volume and the crossfade. Let's do yet another thing. For context, when you walk away from the sound coming from behind something, in this case a door, the sound loses a lot of its higher frequencies, or at least it loses the higher frequencies much faster than it loses the low frequencies. I wanted to imitate that physics behavior using Metasounds, and I thought of 2 ways to accomplish this. Firstly, when the player goes into the range of the start door sound input, it plays the ambient soundscape, and based on 2 manually placed cues on the ambient loop, will also play this system of 3 wave players here. Each sound has a different amount of EQ filter applied, and like the cluster system, will crossfade between them as is appropriate using the distance attenuation, thus simulating the player's proximity to the door. Second, instead of having to guess the appropriate filtering amount inside the door, I can instead feed the distance attenuation into this funky looking node here. Going into this node, we can see that the first thing that happens is another instance of distance attenuated volume control, like we had in the other parts of this system. After that, the audio gets passed through a bi-quad filter. This filter lets me choose the filter type, which, in this instance, is a low-pass filter, and it also lets me decide what frequency to make the cut, and also how much I want the cut to reduce by. Once more, for those that don't know, a low-pass filter allows frequencies lower than the cut frequency to play at a normal volume. This is a reusable node I can place anywhere I need this system. So, if this were to be scaled up, instead of needing to repeat the creation of this system if I use it again, this Metasound node decides the ranges based on inputs that I can set from the source I use it inside, like I've already done for this area. The distance input goes in as normal. and the max and min distances create the first range. The low pass, lower bound frequency input is what decides the cut when the player is furthest away, and the opposite is true for the low pass, upper bound frequency. The audio gets passed through the left and right channel filters. Now that it has the low pass applied to it, we can decide what high pass we want on it using inputs laid out in a similar manner, upper bound being the highest frequency we want filtered, and the lower bound being the lowest. Once that's applied, we can output the audio back into the source using this node. In this case, it gets sent into a mixer that combines the elements of this system. Now the audio is doing what we want it to, when we want it to, we just need it to be spatialized. And so we use this system, courtesy of Dan Reynolds, that converts plus and minus 180 degrees of rotation into plus and minus 1. The clamping mechanics are a little complicated, and he explains it better than I do. So if you'd like to know more about how this was created, please check out his video on it. Now for why I'm using this instead of the engine's default spatialization, remember when I said I would have liked to put in a cool system that lets you hear a conversation through the door? Yeah, this is the foundation of that. We have the directions mapped into values, so all you'd have to do is tell the engine to play the muffled conversation sounds when you're looking a certain direction. Simple. Well, not really, but you get the gist. Then all I have to do is put all three parts into the stereo mixer and we're left with the final result. And that's all she wrote, folks. Well, not all she wrote. Save the best till last, right? I've discussed my audio and music systems, what the music was inspired by, how that translated into the finished concept, and all the things I've learned along the way. And I really do hope that you enjoyed it all and learned something new. So whilst I roll the credits, please enjoy this game's magnum opus, MIC Desperate Times' title theme.